what drives me? Why am I interested in operations and testing or operations in general? Because I'm just a tester, right? What I like to say about myself sometimes, I like to describe myself as an opsy tester. By that I mean that besides the regular questions that a tester is going to ask you, I'm going to ask some more annoying questions such as, what does your build pipeline look like? Can I take a look at your monitoring? Let me see your logs, or can I deploy to production? Now, for me, my love for operations got born kind of by getting into performance testing. How I got into performance testing is pretty simple. I was the only tester on the project. There needed to be done some performance testing that has testing in the title, so I was the tester. So obviously, I got to play a little with this. So as I fell off of performance testing, one of the first things you discover is that your performance testing is nothing unless you have good monitoring. Performance testing without proper monitoring is just like shooting arrows into the dark and not even knowing if you're hitting your target or not. So, of course, from here was a slippery slope. I started asking questions about what kind of alertings we have in place, what the logs look like. And soon enough, I was spending time in the operations room, feeding the operations engineers candy and making them show me cool stuff. So, like, this is my life a few years ago, and enter DevOps. I hear about this term, and I'm going like, wow, what is this? So I find out that DevOps is this amazing new way of developing software that kind of makes you deliver better, faster software, more reliable way to your customers, and brings everybody on the same page. And I figure, yes, this sounds excellent. Sign me up. This is like the punk movement of development here. And I figure, okay, I'm a tester. So what do I do? And I'm a bit confused at this point because I'm looking online for resources, and there's not that many testers talking about DevOps. What do the testers do in DevOps? I read stuff, and people tell me that DevOps supports testing, or even worse, that DevOps is going to automate all the testing. So it's all about automation. It's all about support. There's not much going on that kind of pushes testing forward, because my question is, if you have this new way of doing software development, are you going to really expect me to believe that testing stays the same? So my question is, how does it change testing? How does that DevOps change testing? Now that we're working with all of these new technologies, all of these new and exciting things, how can we push testing forward and do new things that nobody's thought about? So at this point, there's this term called TestOps, and I get excited once again and figure, yeah, TestOps, this must be what I'm looking for, but what is it? And again, I look online, and I find all of this conflicting information, kind of few articles, few blog posts. Nobody seems to agree on what it means. Some people say it's kind of like data science. Some people say it's smart monitoring. So still, we're left with the question, what is TestOps anyway? So at this point, I figure, wait a minute. Like I'm a rational human being. I'm an engineer. I can figure this out for myself. So I figure, well, let's take a step back and look at it. It's TestOps, right? Just like DevOps. I mean, if DevOps is development meets operations, then TestOps might be testing meets operations, right? Or, like another way to look at it is it's whatever happens when testing and operations get together to solve a problem. Or maybe a more pragmatic way of looking at it is you could say that the TestOps is whatever happens when a tester, a developer, and an operations engineer step into a room. And, you might be thinking at this point, hey, wait a minute. I mean, testing and operations, that's kind of like oil and water. Those don't mix. Just like the mythical creature on the slide who's half man, half fish, this is unlikely to be a good combination, is it? Well, I'm going to argue that no. I think testers and operations actually mix well. And I'm going to answer the question, why tester? Why would you want your testers involved in operations? There are quite a few reasons why you might be interested in this, but I'm just going to focus on 3 of them. So for one thing, testers are good at spotting defects. This is a pirate, by the way. And that is a bug that he is spotting and waving to everybody. So, I mean, anybody can spot a bug, but this is a tester's superpower. I mean, the way the testers work, they are really, really good at looking at patterns and picking up discrepancies. Now, if you got a person like this looking at, say, a graph of your production monitoring, interesting things can happen. And this actually happened to me. At some point, I was just looking over graphs for production, database response times, and I instantly had that feeling that something is not right. If you're talking to testers, they will sometimes describe this feeling like, before I even knew there was something wrong with the UI or the system, I had this nagging sensation that something is off here. And of course, like, how to trust your gut at some point, and I kept digging in, and I started comparing the response times for what I was seeing with the response times, say, a week ago in the same day for the service. And sure enough, what I found is that the response times on one of the tables in the database had increased by a tenfold ratio. Well, that's quite alarming, I mean, at this point, they weren't affecting actual users, but it was like a big dip in performance. And we had to ask the question, well, why? Turns out, after digging a little bit with the help of the developers in the DBA, that we just didn't have proper indexing on that table. And because of a promotional event during the weekend, the table had just grown to a size that it had become an issue. Now, the question is, would our monitoring have picked this up eventually? I mean, would it have been picked up by alerts? And the answer is yes, but by the time that the alerts fly in production, it's already a critical issue and it's impacting actual users. Whereas just by looking at a graph one fateful day, I was able to pick up the problem in time, and we fixed it before even anybody reported it. So that was a big win for us. Another reason why you should consider having testers involved in DevOps is that testers are familiar with automation. This is my attempt to draw a Rube Goldberg machine. So, I mean, this is not true of 100% of testers, but you can't deny that, especially in recent years. There's been a big move towards testers becoming more and more accustomed to automation. A lot of the testers I talk to either, write automated scripts, even unit tests for services, or write tooling or other scripts that they use to aid in their testing. I have one friend who was working on automation in testing, or he's basically saying that you can use automation to basically drive your exploratory testing, which I think is very interesting. So, of course, another thing to consider about testing is that they are not afraid of new things. And this is a picture of a tester poking an unidentified object with a stick. And this is exactly what testers do. When you give them a new piece of software, they want to play with it, they want to poke it and prod it and explore it and see what it does. Sometimes they say that they want to break things. I've been corrected on this. Testers do not break your product. They just expose failures that are already there. So the software is already broken. They're just finding it out. But yeah, this is one of the other superpowers of testers. And besides that, you might think, yeah, I mean, with DevOps, DevOps comes with all of these technologies. They're so new and scary even to some developers. So this I say that a lot of the testers I know have done everything from being a flight attendant to a physicist in the previous job. So these are really people who are not afraid to roll up their sleeves and get their hand dirty and play with a new bit of technology. So you have these people on your team who they're good at spotting defects, they're familiar with automation, and we all know DevOps is big on automation, and they're not afraid of new things. So my question to you is, why wouldn't you want them involved in these efforts? So now looking back at this, I figured, okay, so I'm a tester, I want to get involved in this. I don't know what it is, but I have, a little bit of work experience. So I decided to look at my personal work experience during the years and figure, have I done something that might be classified as TestOps, testing meets operation? Have I done something in my previous work that can maybe bring these things together a new way? And I'm going to share with you 3 stories. And we're going to look at them, each in part, and ask ourselves at the end of each of them, like, is this TestOps, is it not? Why would it be? So let's get started. First story is called Moving to the Cloud. Now, imagine that you're working as part of a cross-functional team, and developers and testers and product management, they're all working together in a happy world and delivering wonderful product to their users. And all is well and fine until one day from above somebody says, oh, by the way, we're closing the data center at the end of the year, so everybody's moving to the cloud. So yeah, get started. So of course, this is very nice and all, but we're very conscientious engineers. But at this point, all we know about AWS, which was the cloud solution we were going to move to, is that it's the cloud, it's Amazon, and that was about it. So we got cracking on studying stuff, and the first question that we had to answer is, what is our system going to look like in the new AWS architecture? Because you know what you've got there. You've got those bare metal machines, and you know how much memory they have, and you know what CPU power they have, and you know how the networking works. But in AWS, things aren't that easy. So we took to reading the documentation, and what we found was basically alphabet soup. So when you're trying to pick an instance in Amazon, you got your D2s, your T2s, your M1s and M3s, C1s, C3s, I3s, C4s, new generation, you don't even know. And even if you choose your instance type, because they're all different, they all do different things. Even when you choose your instance type, you still have to answer the question, so how big do you want it? Do you want a large, an extra large, 2XL, 4XL, 8XL? Obviously, this is a little bit harder than ordering a coffee at Starbucks. So the question is, how do you choose? So how did we choose? We decided, of course, that we were going to test this because the first thing that somebody said on my team, and one of the developers stuck his finger in the air and said, "Well, we'll just go with the second largest one from the left, and hope everything is gonna be fine." And again, I'm a tester. I test. I'm like, maybe we might want to check that assumption. So we decided, instead of just picking an instance at random and praying for the best, to approach this in an organized way, just like professionals. So how did we go about it? First step is you study production. We looked at our metrics for production. We analyzed our traffic patterns, tried to determine what the users were doing, how fast each API was responding, what the database response times looked like, all of this stuff. And taking all of this stuff into consideration, second step was to devise a test scenario. This is basically just like a performance test, only we try to emulate production traffic as faithfully as possible. And what we came up with was something like, this is just an example, let's say 70% of your users are doing this flow, and then 19% may be doing this flow, and another percentage of users are maybe doing a third flow. Now, after we got this test scenario, the next step was to actually run the test. Now, this one was done twofold. At first, we ran it in stage. Our stage environment at this point was a faithful mirror of production. All of the machines were exactly the same capacity and or architected in exactly the same way. And we ran against stage and measured, and this was our baseline. Now, what we wanted to achieve is the same or better performance than what we got for stage. So we started spawning up clusters in AWS. And you might try the first run of tests with an M1 large instance, and then you might compare it to a C1 because M1 is memory optimized, whereas your bottleneck appears to be your CPU. So then you switch to this. Then you compare that to maybe the newer generation. And then you figure, well, what if I add some more machines to the cluster? Would that impact performance? How would it? Would it be better, much better? If I add one machine and now I have 6 instead of 5, is that going to give me a proportional increase in performance? And then you might want to supersize it. What if I make it an XL or a 2XL? And we ran all of these tests, and while we were doing this, we were doing performance tuning. We were looking at the size of the machines, at the number of the machines we were using, at the size of the database instances, which are not pictured here, and all of these things. And we kind of did exploratory testing with a performance test on a cloud platform. So that was pretty interesting. And the next step is to actually pull all these data together and analyze it. And you're looking at all of these things, you're making decisions based on actual numbers. So when you finally get to choose your instance type, you've done more than just stick the finger in the air and figure, oh, I'll just go with the biggest one. You can say, I'm going with this machine because this gives me this much performance. You have an increase in performance that you can actually measure. You have actual data that you can show to people, not only management, it's just to anybody who asks, that is motivating your decision, which is something that other teams were not doing around us, and we were quite proud. So at this point, this is a very nice story. We've chosen our instance type, but let's go back to the question, is this TestOps? Now, before I go to answer this, I'm going to introduce a term. Does anybody in the audience know what an oracle is? I'm not talking about database. I'm talking about an oracle when you're talking about testing. Hands up if you know. Okay, a few people, that's good. Well, the next slide is going to come in handy for everybody else. So an oracle is a heuristic principle or mechanism by which we recognize a failure or a problem. Well, that's a mouthful, isn't it? Right? Okay, let me break this down for you. Basically, what this means is that an oracle is what tells you whether your test is passed or failed. Let me take an example. You have a specification that tells you that when the user does something, the system is going to behave in a certain way. When you execute the test, you compare the results that you get with whatever the spec said. And that's how you determine if your test is passed or failed. In other instances, you might have another system that you would put input data into and it would generate predicted outputs. And you might use that to inform your testing and use it as an oracle. Or you might be using, a downscale model of your system as an oracle. Or as some people have, like say you're rebuilding a legacy application for which there's no documentation, all of the developers have left, and you have to kind of rewrite it on a better technology stack, but you don't know what it's doing. Well, in that case, your oracle is actually the legacy app, because that's the best that you've got. So knowing this, let's answer our question. could this be TestOps? Well, what's going on in our scenario, moving to the cloud? We're emulating production traffic. We're using our monitoring heavily to, analyze the production traffic that we actually have. We're using provisioning for entirely new clusters in Amazon, which is definitely something in the realm of operations. We're doing this stuff that is called performance tuning, where we're playing with the instance type, size, numbers, and things like this, which is usually something done in performance testing. And very interestingly, we're using production monitoring data as an oracle. By this I mean, how we know if we're successful in our tests, if we have the architecture that we desire, that our test is passed, is if we have a performance that is at least as good or better than what's existing in production. So you're using your existing monitoring data for production, for your live production environment, as your oracle for your test. I think that's amazing. So you've got your developers, your operations engineers, your testers working all on this stuff, and it's not just operations and not just development. It's not just testing that you're doing here, because it's just to choose the instances for your new system, for your new architecture. So I think this might be, maybe it's a fin of the TestOps wheel. Maybe we're getting to get a glimpse of it. But no, believe me, let's move forward. Next story is called The Great Environment Migration, and it's a sequel to the first one. So the Great Environment Migration, right? I mean, you've chosen your instance types, but now, the big day is coming near, the day when you actually move your live production environment to the cloud. And, you've got a web service that's getting millions and millions of requests per second that is critical to the business. If users cannot log in, the business cannot sell products, the company does not make money. This is a critical thing. So, no pressure. It's going to be easy, right? So, of course, until the big day when you actually move your production environment, you've got all of these other environments, right? Everybody has, development QA stage or something like that. And, you've got all of these environments running around, and as I told you, the data center is actually closing, so we have to move these two. So, what would you do to move your dev environment? One of the things that you might do, this was an internal service, all of the clients were internal, so one of the things that you might do is you just send out an email to the DL, and you say something like, hello, this is the so-and-so team, dev environment is going to have an hour or two of downtime, we'll email you when everything's back up again. Then you tear down your system, you raise the new system in AWS, and then you send out an email to the users after you do the DNS switch. And that's a perfectly acceptable way to migrate your dev environment, because there's not that many users there, people will understand, it's not critical to business like production, right? Well, we chose to not do this. We chose to look at all of these environments, and we had 6 of them actually. We chose to look at each and every one of them as a great opportunity to rehearse a live production migration. So basically, this is the story of how a developer, an operations engineer, and a tester walked into a room to test out the production migration on the QA environment. So I'm going to walk you through this. First thing you need to understand is what we got going on. This was typical web service. We had a load balancer in front of some app servers, and they were all pointing to a couple of DB servers. Nothing spectacular. Now, of course, we'd mirrored the same architecture in AWS. You have your ELB, your Elastic Load Balancer. This is basically just Amazon's solution for a load balancer. You've got your EC2 instances, which are going to be your app servers. And you've got your RDS database, which was basically just a fancy Amazon MySQL server. So in order to do this, the first thing we did was set up replication from our database to RDS. And once we had this in place, we could begin. So as I said, then walks the tester, right? So the tester, at this point, starts a load test against the existing data center. We were all looking at our graphs, everything is good, system is working as expected, we move on. And comes the developer. Now the developer, for each and every one of the machines, starts tunneling the traffic from that instance into AWS. And once the traffic is being tunneled there, we can shut down the application server, because anyway, the traffic is not going in there. And then, you repeat for each and every instance type. At this point in time, all of your traffic that is coming through your old data center is being actually tunneled over to AWS into the new instance of your service. And all of the data that had to replicate is still getting there, so you have eventual consistency. Now, why we did all of this stuff is because we wanted that people who would still have the old DNS to still hit a live application instead of maybe of hitting nothing and getting to see downtime or errors. So all that's left at this point is for the operations engineer to do the DNS switch, right? So we did a DNS switch. We're very happy. All looked good. We actually pulled up the service online. We interacted a bit with the UI, created a new account. Everything looked lovely. We were like almost high-fiving each other and saying, yeah, good job, team. And then we look at the graph and, uh-oh. It's starting to go red. This looks like downtime. But how can this be? Because just a minute ago, I pulled up the UI. We pull up the UI again. It's there, man. This is what's going on. What's happening here? Because I can plainly see that the service is online, although the graph is just telling me that it's red, all red. So what had gone on here is that because of the way the infrastructure was working, the DNS switch was twofold. Our operations engineer had to do a switch for the DNS inside of the corporate network and a separate one for outside the corporate network. And, the first one went through, so everybody within the company could still see the service online, which for dev is fine and lovely because you just have internal customers. But everybody outside of the corporate network was experiencing downtime. So had this happened in our actual production environment, now everything would be down and then nobody would see anything. So obviously we decided to automate the DNS flip at this point. And now, that turned out to be a good decision. Now, again, could this possibly be TestOps? Well, let's take a look at the facts. You got a developer, an operations engineer, and a tester. They're all inside of a room. They're all working together on one thing. Fits one of our definitions, right? We're all leveraging previous performance tests, but we're not running performance tests because at this point, we've already assessed the performance of the would-be system. We just want to leverage the previous work that's been done on the testing side to generate traffic. And again, very interestingly, you're using your Oracle, the thing that's telling you whether your test is passed or failed. Your Oracle is your monitoring. You're using that. As in, at this point, the only way we knew that our test had failed was when all of the alerts started flying and all of the graphs went red. So unless we had the proper monitoring, at this point, we wouldn't know if we had been successful or not. So I'm inclined to say that, this might be a sighting of TestOps. But, let's go forward and ask some more questions. Now, sometimes you can't scale horizontally. This is another story in this series. So basically, what do you do when you have a denial of service attack in production? Now, the background to the story is this one. The same service that I've been talking about was dependent on another internal service. And these guys had experienced a very, very nasty denial of service attack against their system. They went down for a few hours. It was pretty gory. It was pretty bad. So, we knew this was an existing problem. And since these guys had to migrate to AWS as well, one of the ideas that was being thrown around at the time is like, what if we make it bigger, like throw more metal at it, they said. Like the ship that was too big to sink, the Titanic, that sure worked well for them, right? So, basically the idea was like, maybe we can just outgrow our problem. Like maybe if we get like a beefier DB instance and bigger and better app servers and more of them, maybe we can just like outgrow this and it won't be an issue anymore. So, well, by this point, you've already met me. You know me. What am I going to say? I'm going to say, OK, that sounds great. Let's test it. So test it we did. And the first thing we did was we recreated the conditions. This started just in QA, where I talked with the developers in my team and the other team. We figured out the scenario that would reproduce this. We ran it against QA at work to be reproduced the problem. We tried it against Stage, which was a beefy environment that was production-like in nature, and that worked as well. And then the next thing we had to do is we made it bigger. We provisioned a whole new environment in Amazon that would just take no traffic at all. It was just meant for this test. And we just threw everything at it. We supersized everything. The DB, the instances, the number of instances, everything was, fast networking, great CPU, lots of memory. Just put in a lot of resources. And then we reran the scenario. So what do you guys think happened? I've seen a few smirks. Yeah, it bought us 5 more minutes. So an additional 5 minutes, the system was up, and then it just went down. And, through the forum, at this point, we realized, well, sometimes you can't outgrow your problems, and you would have to do a little bit more work on the application side to eliminate the bottlenecks that we were experiencing. So, lesson learned. But again, let's figure out, is this TestOps or not? It seems pretty promising because, again, you have testers, you have developers. you have operations engineers and working together, this time across teams, which is even more exciting. And you're trying to reproduce production conditions, which means, again, you have to talk to the developers, you have to understand, you have to look at the logs, you have to understand exactly what was triggering the problem, how you reproduce it. You have to, nail the exact key elements for this. So this was like a common effort. And you're doing a lot of provisioning on AWS again. This is the realm of operations. So it looks pretty promising. And once again, you're using your monitoring as your oracle. And not only just, alerts pass or fail, we were using the monitoring to the idea that we would look at the attack, we would look at the curve of the response time, and then when we ran our test, we would compare the same curve. And we're like, does this look the same? Do we need to tweak it? And we tweaked it until that curve looked exactly the same, and we got a similar failure time. So pretty good stuff, I'd say. I'm quite inclined to think that this might be TestOps at this point. So now the problem with all of this stuff is, I have to ask what's next, because I like all of these things. They've been very exciting, but the one thing they share in common is that they're kind of one-off operations. How often do you migrate your service to the cloud? Hopefully just once, right? If you're doing it right. So of course it's it's something that must be done, and we're working under duress. But wouldn't it be nice if we could bring this to our day-to-day somehow? What kind of stuff could be possible if you already have your developers, your operations engineers, and your testers working together? What kind of things could you build? And that's what I'm really interested in. These are just a couple of ideas. Say you have your very own CI machine, right? And by this I mean, imagine if you could run your tests locally and continuous integration server identical to the one that your team uses. Say you've got a Docker container running in a VM, starting up Jenkins, so that at every single commit it would just run your tests and give you the result before even pushing your code to master. That would mean you would never have a red build again. That scenario where your coworker just pushed something at 5 p.m. and broke the build and left for home, and you come in the next morning and you're blocked because he's late and you can't do any of your work, that would never happen again. You could solve this, right? How about this for a change? I've told you that we were looking at our production graphs and trying to figure out what the users were doing and trying to craft some artificial scenarios that would kind of emulate what production users did, but we didn't really know. Say you could actually generate your tests from your production data, say from your logs. Maybe, if you worked with everybody on the team, you could replay your production logs in a way that you are not generating production-like traffic, but exactly production traffic, exercising your service in exactly the same way that real live users are. And, there are people doing these things, by the way. These are not new ideas. There are people out there who are doing all of these things, but it's not common. How about tests that are actually monitoring? Lots of us test in production things. Do you test in production? Do you run tests in production? Raise your hand up. Not that many people. Wow. Nice word. I don't mean testing only in production, but many of us do run tests in production. Be there only smoke tests once you release. But say you had tests that constantly run in production, but were actually hooked to your alert system in the same way that your monitoring is. So that when your tests fail, you get a text message or a call from PagerDuty in exactly the same way that it would happen if your CPU went to 99%. Wouldn't that be nice? If you could do this reliably. And the problem with all of these things is they sound like great things to have, but say you're a developer and you love your very own CI. That sounds like a great idea. But the trouble is that you've got no idea how that Jenkins instance that you have is set up. But I bet your tester knows. And, with all this Docker stuff you've heard about, you've been to a conference, it sounds fancy. But, you don't have any time for that. You're doing other stuff with your time. So, you have no time to ramp up on Docker. But I bet your operations engineer can't shut up about it, and I bet he knows how to do this. So if you have all these people in the same room working together, and this is actually a priority, you can achieve all of these things. It's just a matter of getting there. So the question is, how do you get there? Because I totally understand. There are barriers. You don't have the same line management. You don't report to the same people. It's hard. Sometimes you don't even see these people. I used to work in a company, the operations engineers that I've been mentioning, they had their own little room somewhere where they were working away. And the only time you would see them was when you would go up to them and bother them because you needed a ticket solved. And if they actually came out of the room to your desk, you would be instantly struck by fear. because you go like, oh my God, what's happened to production? Because that was the only reason why they would come out of the room to join you, like in the open space, like if something was wrong. And you have these people who are part of your team initially that strike fear into the heart of developers and testers alike. So are you telling me that I'm supposed to work with these guys? Well, yes. I am telling you exactly that. But you need to build some relationships and you need to build some trust, and you don't need management to tell you to do this. This is very, very easy. And I'm going to give you a very easy way to do these things. And just ask 3 little questions. 3 little questions that you can ask whether you're a tester, an operations engineer, or a developer. And it will help, build trust and relationships within the team so that you actually do feel like a team and you're working on the same project. So the first of the little questions is what are you working on? So, like imagine you have like this coworker, and maybe he's the DevOps guy, right? Maybe he is the person who knows about, Docker and containers and stuff like that, but, he's always hidden away somewhere in a corner and you don't know how to approach him, and, you never share maybe the same backlog. But it's just as easy, like if you're working in an open space, just walk up to a person and go, hey, I heard you're working on an interesting thing. You want to, tell me a few things about it? I'd love to learn something. And at that point, this is great because this is the opportunity to express interest into something that one of your teammates is doing, something that he probably feels that nobody else cares about at this point. And you get to get involved. You get to open up a conversation. You get to throw around some ideas. Maybe you learn some insights. Maybe you give him a few good ideas. This is the perfect springboard to offer your help and say something like, hey, next time you're doing that, maybe, I can help you, or, can I pair with you on it, or something like that. And at the very least, you've expressed interest in something that one of your teammates is doing, and that's important because that shows that you care, and that shows that you're interested to maybe take things further. And I think that's a great question to ask. I have a coworker who's an introvert, and he says that this doesn't work on introverts, and I'm going to say it did work on him. But the problem is, like, what he wanted me to point out is that you can't always walk up to people and distract them. But maybe you can do it once or twice, but then you can, everybody's using nowadays Slack or Skype or some sort of IM client. Like once you've built this relationship and you've had a couple of these conversations, you can schedule your visits. Ask him like, hey, if you've got 5 minutes later on, ping me, and I'll come and you can show me what you've been working on. That's excellent, and it's a very good way to know what other people in other teams are working on as well. I use this all the time. Now, the second question is, what if you're the person working on the interesting thing, and you want to drive interest in your team? So what I suggest you do in this case, you just ask people, hey, you got 5 minutes? You want to see something cool? Now, this is irresistible to engineers, especially if it's technology. Nobody can resist a question like this because you're just asking for 5 minutes and you've promised something cool. Now, you have to deliver at this point, but that's not easy because if you're really passionate about something, that shows, and it's just enough to show somebody, like maybe I was doing performance testing in my company, right? So I was the performance testing girl, which is not something you want to be. You want everybody to be into this stuff. They were like, oh, yeah, you want something performance, just go to Yana, she'll take care of it. And they were like, they're done with the whole thing. And I'm like, now, what if I'm sick one day, which actually did happen? What if I'm sick one day and they need to run tests? This is not going to work out. So I kept doing this thing to people. I'd ask them, hey, you want to see something cool? And it's enough to just maybe show them some data. When you're looking at a graph and you don't know what test has been run, that's meaningless to you. It looks cool, but you don't know. But maybe you give them a little bit of insight into something you've been working on, and you're telling them, do you see this traffic pattern right here? And you interpret it in a new and exciting way and reveal something they didn't know about the system. And then their eyes go wide and they go, whoa. And you get asked questions like, hey, next time you're working on this, can I watch you? Can you show me? Can I do it with you? Maybe we can run on these tests together. And something even more exciting happened. Remember the operations engineers I mentioned? One day, they came out of their room and walked up to my desk and they asked me how my testing was going and if I had any more interesting data to show them. And I was floored at this point. I was like, oh my God, I'm changing something here. Something is happening, and I'm like on the right track. And then, it's just because we built this relationship, even though we weren't reporting in the same people, we didn't have the same managers, we felt like we were part of a team, and we could come to each other and ask about stuff. And that was insanely cool. Now, the third thing that I am suggesting is this simple question. Can you pair with me on this? Now, this is where I'm being a little bit sneaky. So, we're all busy people and we've got a lot of stuff to do. And usually when you're working on something, you might not actually need the other person's help. You could probably do it alone. There's many merits to pairing, and I'm not going to go into them. But the reason I'm suggesting you do this is because it's the easiest way to drive a person's interest in something. Like, say you have this awesome tester and you want to get them involved in something that's a bit techy and they don't know much about. And you can't expect them to know how to ask, please involve me in this, but you think they might be a natural talent, they might be really good at this. Or the same way, like say you want to teach somebody chef or something. You just go up to them and say, hey, I need your help with something. Would you have some time to pair with me on this? And why I'm suggesting you do this is because at the end of that pairing session, you have another person who spent just as much time as you on a problem, who's invested just as much effort, knows just as much about it, and hopefully is just as passionate about it as you. And this is how you drive change. Like, once you have these people who are basically advocates in your team, it's very easy to have a conversation, say, about performance testing or TestOps or monitoring, because everybody's on the same page and everybody knows what you're talking about because you've been spreading it around. So just, these 3 little questions. What are you working on? When to see something cool? And can you pair with me on this? These are all very, very easy things that any of us can ask. And they're not hard to do, and soon enough you'll be like dancing in a happy little circle with all of the other engineers in your team, and you're actually going to be feeling like you are part of the same team working on the same thing. So like, my message to you is that I think TestOps is real. Like, but it's not it's not a white whale that you have to chase down, or it's not something that other people do. I had a developer tell me once, I don't like testing because testing is boring. And I mean, it might be boring if what you think about as testing is going through a checklist and executing a pre-written set of test cases. There's so much more to testing than that, and I've shown you a few things, and I feel these are all exciting and new, and I think that we're just scratching the surface here. So I think that TestOps is not only real, but achievable, and it's just something that you can do in your team. And, given the chance, all teams can work on new exciting problems that solve common concerns of operations engineers and testers and developers, so we can deliver software in a faster, better, and more enjoyable way to all of us. Because you won't have to have that block, oh, I have to send this to testing, or oh, it's the operations engineers again bothering me about the database. You all are part of the same team and working on new, interesting, hard problems. So this is basically my presentation. I rushed through it a little bit, but this happens sometimes. Before I leave, I'd like to thank a few people, because this is the first presentation I've ever done at a conference. I did it at GeekCon as well. But I wouldn't be standing here today if there weren't a few people who helped me out. So I'm part of something called the Speakeasy program. And the Speakeasy program is a program that encourages diversity in conference speaking. And it's started by these 2 awesome lady testers, Fiona Charles and Anne-Marie Charrett. And it was their brainchild. And they basically have this program that pairs a wannabe speaker with a mentor. And they paired me with Karsten Feilberg, who is my mentor. He's an awesome person. I've only got to meet him recently, and this May at another conference, but he's been so much help, working with me on my presentation skills, talking about, the fears that I experience public speaking, because I have to tell you now that at the end, I am terrified of this. So, I'm hoping that I did a good job. But, without them, I wouldn't have had the guts to submit any presentations. I also want to thank my team in eBay, the EPD team, that supported me and is the reason I'm here. I also want to send a shout out to the former IMS team, current identity team in Adobe. These guys are legends. They're the people where I experienced all the stories that I told you today. So all of the Amazon migration stuff that was there. If you ever meet any of them, tell them that they're awesome. And last but not least, I want to thank my coworker Andrzej Grzezik. The people who are familiar with the Java community might go to GeekCon. He's one of the organizers for GeekCon Poland, and I'm very proud to say that he's one of my coworkers. And Andrzej was a great help. He was the only person who looked at my abstract and gave me actual criticism, because everybody was like, "Oh yeah, it's lovely." Like, no, what sucks about it? And he was the only person who actually told me, like, "Listen, makes no sense. You have to rewrite this bit. This, to me, is not good enough." And person who gives honest feedback. So one of the pieces of feedback that Andrzej has given me is that I need to have a picture of me so that people know what I look like, and cat pictures, lots of cat pictures in my presentation. And I have listened. I have not been slacking. Here is a picture of me holding this adorable kitten. And I'm going to leave you to bask in the adorableness of this kitten, and I encourage you to ask me questions. Like, there's the app. If you're shy, you can tweet me, you can email me. I'm so happy to talk about this to anybody who will listen. And also, like, if you have stories, we still have 10 minutes here, so I would love to hear your stories. Yes? Okay, so you're saying that you're delivering a solution that that the customer is going to have. Well, that's a bit more complicated. I think you can work up until that point, up until it's mature in this way, like doing continuous delivery and stuff, so that everything is production ready at every point. I mean, even though you might not deliver to the customer all the time, you can keep a pretty good flow of information. And another thing that you can do, I mean, it's not the same as having the whole team co-located, but if you have like really good support with your customers and really good communication, and maybe somebody who's engineering there, like instead of having a manager contact, the thing that works best is just having a chat engineer to engineer. And there are people developing solutions that, you know, they ship to customers, but when you get that engineer to engineer contact, you can actually talk about what the issues are, what problems you want to solve, and maybe there's more work to be done like on both sides, but I think it might work a little bit better. Oh yeah, definitely. The way that I do it is I use the first one, like, hey, what are you working on? And then you're like, oh, that's interesting, can I join you? And you know, the answer sometimes might be no, you know, you have to be prepared. Like, people don't always have time, but you can say is like, next time you're doing this, can you give me a heads up? Because, you know, sometimes people don't want to stop what they're doing and start to explain something from the get-go. But you've got the general idea, and if it's something that might have a chance of repeating itself in the future, say like you're writing a chef recipe, right? There's going to be more chef recipes at some point if you're using chef. You can definitely do that. So it does work. Sure.
So when you did all the measurements for the different instructions in AWS, did you actually see a big difference in the message of one solution picture and the rest?
For the instances?
Yeah.
Well, immediately when we tried like one of the memory optimized machines, it was a huge CPU bottleneck. So we could scratch that one off straight off the list. For other ones, it was a bit more difficult to tell. So pretty soon we went to the C machines, but then we still had to do a lot of testing. Was it C1 or C3? The C3 were the new instances. Now C1 is like deprecated. There's a C4, but still, I mean, you're looking at these specs and they give you these tables like networking high. What does that mean? What's high? And you're pressed to get an actual metric there because, you know, Amazon don't want to guarantee anything. So yeah, you would sometimes see big differences. Sometimes you'd have to run a larger array of tests. For some, we saw that I think with the C1, C3, if I'm not mistaken, the C1 performed better on a short-term test, but once you let the test run longer, you'd see differences. So you don't really know. It's very much exploratory testing at that point, and it's exploratory testing with DevOps involved, basically. It's really cool. Any other questions? Or maybe you have some stories. I would love to hear any of your stories. Have you worked on anything that is kind of similar, like somewhere where you have like the operations engineers and the testers working on something? Oh, thank you. So I think like for the people watching the video, like I was just told that it's a very nice approach. Like, I mean, for me personally, it's just like I've been successful connecting people and my team, and I was just like at some point I just took a step back and asked, hey, like I'm probably not special. Is there something I'm doing though that anybody else can do? And I figured like I keep asking all of these annoying questions, and there might be something to them, you know. So this is why I'm sharing them with you today, because I figure you might find them useful. Yes. Right, so the question was, how do you encourage maybe somebody who is a QA person or a different person to get interested in these DevOpsy things? So all of these tips, go ask them what they're working on, build a relationship with them, show them cool things like, hey, you want to see something? I'm running these sets of scripts. Come watch. And they're going to have questions because, once you sit them down with you, you just grab them and sit them down with you. If they're co-located, that's easy. If not, you can do a remote pairing session. But I mean, sometimes, you think that the person with the least amount of knowledge should be interested, but sometimes they're too shy. They don't know what questions to ask, and or they're kept away. Again, you might not have the same management, and these things, they're just like virtual barriers. They're not real things. Like, you can usually walk up to a person and just engage them in conversation. And the pairing, this is why I've kept it last. I think that's the most powerful one. When you're pairing with somebody, like when they're sitting next to you, they can ask all their questions, and you can explain anything you want, and people just naturally get excited, I find. So in my personal experience, people just, pick up interest. And, in my previous organization, I'm no longer the performance person. I've left now, but, they're still doing testing. And it's because everybody else was on board and saw that it was awesome. And I'm hoping that they continue to work in this way. A wish list, wow. Yeah, I don't know. User friendliness, I found, is very important. Like, if you're using something like New Relic, it's a pleasure to use. It will make you look at that graph with pride and happiness because it's nice. You can zoom in. It looks pretty. If you have something like Zabbix, it's a bit more, it feels like you're getting your hands dirty when you're digging for stats. So amazingly, you think like, oh, you're engineers, you can look at graphs. Like, the more user-friendly your monitoring solution is, I feel that the more people want to spend time with it and, take care of it and research it and look into more interesting stats. So I think this is like my number one. Okay, I don't know, are there any questions in the app? I don't even know. I've not used the DevOps app so far. So, let's see. On my phone. No, excellent. Well, in that case, it was a pleasure having you all. Thank you so much for coming, and I hope you enjoyed it.